You have watched the survival videos, you know how to start a fire with a bow drill. Or at least you have watched someone do it 17 times, and you are fairly confident you understand the principle you know about debris huts, and water purification, and edible plants, and all the rest of it. You have absorbed a significant amount of information about what prehistoric life required, but there is one skill nobody talks about. One skill that every single person who survived the Paleolithic possessed at a level that would make you look by comparison. Like a child who has just discovered that objects exist, one skill that is so foundational, so completely invisible to the modern mind, that most survival content creators do not even recognize it as a skill. They treat it as a given. It is not a given. It is perhaps the hardest thing a modern human being would have to learn, and most of us would be dead before we learned it. The skill is reading other humans, not in the pop psychology sense. Not personality types or body language tips from a book, the specific, survival critical ability to read the internal state of the people you are depending on to keep you alive in a group of 6 to 12 people in the deep forest 10,000 years ago. Your survival did not depend only on the forest, it depended on the people standing between you and the forest. And reading those people correctly constantly, in real time, was the difference between a group that made decisions that kept everyone alive and a group that fractured at exactly the wrong moment and died. Let us be specific about what this actually means. In a Mesolithic hunting band, there was no democracy in the formal sense, and no autocracy in the formal sense either. There was something more complex and more demanding than either. There was a constantly renegotiated social hierarchy, built on demonstrated competence, accumulated trust, and the group's ongoing collective assessment of who knew what and whether they were telling the whole truth about it. Every member of that group was continuously reading, every other member not consciously. Not with words, but with the full bandwidth of human social perception, operating at maximum sensitivity. The elder who claimed to know where the aurochs had gone after the frost, was she certain? Or was she guessing and covering the uncertainty because she was afraid of losing status? The hunter who said the route to the east was clear. Was he confident, or was there something he had noticed that he had not mentioned yet because he was processing it? The youngest person who had gone silent for the last hour, was that normal processing? Or was that the beginning of fear that was going to become panic, at exactly the moment when panic was most dangerous? These are not abstract questions. They were life and death questions. They were asked and answered continuously, without words, through a perceptual system so finely calibrated by natural selection that modern researchers studying hunter-gatherer bands consistently report being unable to detect the communication that is clearly happening. The bands coordinate in ways that are not explicable by the verbal content of what is being said. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner, in her 4-decade study of the Jew/Honsi San people of the Kalahari, documented what she called the social information processing that occurred around campfires, and her finding was that the content of what people said around the fire was only a fraction of the information being exchanged. The rest was in tone, timing, who spoke after whom, who said nothing when speech would have been expected, and what that silence communicated to a group that had learned to read it. This was not decoration. This was the operating system in the deep forest. This system governed everything. The hunt was coordinated not through explicit commands, but through a mutual understanding of each person's state so complete that the group could read whether a member was at full capacity or compromised before that person had decided whether to announce it. You did not need to say you were injured, the group read it in your movement. You did not need to say you were frightened, the group read it in your silence. And the group made adjustments based on that reading that you might not even be aware were being made. This seems almost supernatural when you describe it at scale. It was not. It was the result of something specific and something learnable. Though not easily, it was the result of years of close daily contact with the same small number of people in high-stakes environments, where the feedback loop between accurate social reading and survival outcome was immediate and unambiguous. If you misread the elder's certainty and followed a route she was actually uncertain about, you learned it within a day. If you misread the hunter's silence as processing, and it was actually early, you learned it when the hunt broke down. The feedback was not delayed by weeks or months, or filtered through institutional layers. It was immediate. The environment was the teacher, and the lesson was always the same. Read the room correctly or pay for it. Now consider what the modern world has done to this skill. The average person in the industrialized world spends the majority of their social time in contexts that are either low-stakes, scripted, or mediated through screens. The feedback loop between accurate social reading and outcome has been stretched to near invisibility. You can misread your colleagues for years and survive it professionally. You can misread your friends for decades, and the relationship simply becomes shallower. You can misread your own family, and the damage accrues so slowly that nobody can identify the source. This is not a moral failure. It is the predictable result of a social environment that no longer requires the skill to be sharp. The skill is there. The neurological substrate for it is there. You are carrying the hardware of a Mesolithic hunter-gatherer's social radar. But the software has not been updated in a very long time, and most of what you are running is decades-old pattern recognition from a social environment that has almost nothing in common with the one the hardware was built for. Researcher Robin Dunbar at Oxford has spent decades working on what is now called Dunbar's number, the cognitive limit, on the number of people any human being can maintain stable social relationships with simultaneously, which he places at approximately 150. But what is less often discussed from Dunbar's work is why that number exists. It exists because maintaining a stable social relationship in the evolutionary sense is not passive, it requires active, ongoing, energetically expensive social monitoring of that person's state. Your brain is constantly running background processes on every person in your social network, tracking their last known state, modeling what has probably changed since then, flagging anomalies, assessing whether your last read of them was accurate or needs updating. For a Mesolithic band of 12 people living in close daily contact, that system was running at full capacity on a very small number of people with very high-quality incoming data. The result was a social reading accuracy that has no modern equivalent. They knew each other the way you do not know another human being in the modern world, not because they were smarter, because the system they lived in demanded it and rewarded it every single day. So what does this mean for you? If you were dropped into a Mesolithic band, tomorrow the first thing that would betray you would not be your inability to start a fire. It would not be your failure to identify edible plants, it would be your social illegibility. Your emotional state would be misread constantly because you would be producing signals that the group had no template for. Your face would say things your words were not saying. Your body would say things your face was not saying, and the group, which depended on accurate social reading for its survival, would do what groups have always done with illegible members. It would exclude you from the decisions that mattered. It would route around you. It would survive in spite of you rather than because of you, and equally, you would be misreading them. You would interpret silences that were communications as nothing. You would interpret careful, deliberate speech as confidence when it was concealment. You would miss the moment when the group's collective assessment of the situation shifted, because that shift would happen in the space between words and the texture of attention and the direction of bodies. And you would not be able to read it. This is the terrifying skill. Not terrifying because it is dangerous in the way a predator is dangerous, terrifying because its absence is invisible to the person who lacks it. You do not know what you are not reading. You do not know what signals you are sending that you did not intend to send. The gap between your self-perception and your social legibility in a high-stakes group context is, for most modern people, enormous. And in the Mesolithic, that gap was measured not in misunderstandings and hurt feelings, but in whether the group included you in the decision of which way to run. Here is what makes this different from every other survival skill on every survival list you have ever read. You can practice fire starting. You can practice tracking. You can practice plant identification. You can practice navigation. All of these skills respond to deliberate solo practice. You can get meaningfully better at them in a weekend. Social reading does not respond to solo practice. It does not respond to reading about it. It does not respond to watching videos. It responds to one thing and one thing only: extended high stakes, close contact time with a small group of people in an environment where the feedback between your accuracy and the outcome is rapid and unambiguous. This is why the skill has vanished. Not because it was forgotten, because the conditions required to develop it no longer exist in most modern lives. You cannot buy the conditions, you cannot download them. You cannot acquire them from content, you can only create them. Imperfectly, by choosing to spend extended time with a small number of people in situations where what you do together actually matters, and where getting it wrong has consequences you can feel immediately. The Mesolithic did not produce exceptional social readers because its people were exceptional. It produced them because it had no tolerance for the alternative. Your hardware is still there. The question is whether you will ever give it a reason to run.